Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. John Madden is probably the greatest color commentator in the history of the National Football League. He was a true revolutionary and changed the way that broadcasts were run forever, raising the bar for all color commentators from the moment he stepped into the booth and put on a headset. He's announced hundreds of games, was on his network's marquee broadcasts for a quarter century, whether it was CBS, NBC, Fox, or ABC, and was on the mic for a boatload of playoff games and 11 Super Bowls. The first of these came back at Super Bowl XVI on January 24, 1982. And 9 months later, Madden was here at a Division III college football game. This is not a skit on Saturday Night Live or a parody or a comedy bit on a show. This is completely real. What are John Madden and Pat Summerall, the marquee announcing team on CBS, doing here at a random Division III school 9 months after calling the Super Bowl? Well, the story behind how this came to be is absolutely fascinating, and is something that in all likelihood we will never see again. This is the story behind the strangest and craziest broadcast of John Madden's illustrious career. Before I talk about the broadcast, we need some context to understand the landscape of the NFL at the time that allowed for something like this to happen. The year is 1982, and the league is in a state of turmoil. There has been labor unrest before in the league under the guidance of Commissioner Pete Rozelle. There was a mini stoppage during training camp and the offseason in 1968, 1970, and in 1974, with the final year forcing teams to use replacement players for preseason games. However, in the over 60-year history of the NFL, never before have any regular season games been canceled because of a strike. That all changed in 1982. I'm not going to dive too much into the specifics of the strike, but the short of it is that the NFLPA wanted the players to receive 55% of the gross revenues that the league made. Neither side seemed willing to budge. The NFL didn't want to do this, and thought that the percentage was far too high, and the NFLPA was unwilling to go lower, and was unwilling to concede their demands including a salary fund, a wage scale based on seniority, and performance bonuses. And with tensions between the two sides rising, it seemed inevitable, even when the season started, that a strike was going to happen. After the first 2 games of the season, the players went on strike. And for the first time ever since the creation of the NFL, there would be no football on Sundays in the fall. The players' strike lasted nearly 2 months, lasting for a total of 57 days. It comprised 8 weeks of the season. And while the league was able to reschedule one of the games that got canceled to January, making it the first time ever that the NFL played a regular season game in January, this meant that 7 games would not be played, and the season shrunk from 16 games to just 9. Making it the shortest season in league history from a games played standpoint. And during this time, obviously, no one was working. The coaches were off, the players were off, and from a production and broadcast standpoint, all of the announcers and crew were off doing other things. For guys like John Madden, they thought they wouldn't be getting back into the booth until the strike was over, and until there was NFL football again. But little did he know that he was on the verge of calling his strangest game yet. Back in 1982, ABC and CBS had contracts with the NCAA, with CBS's contract being worth over $131 million. As part of the contract, in even-numbered years, ABC would be required to air 6 Division II games, and CBS would be required to air 4 Division III games. The networks would then flip their obligations during odd-number years. These games didn't have to be shown nationally, they just had to be shown. What the networks usually did in these situations was televise the game in the local area that the game was being played, and that was it. The quality of the broadcast, as you can expect for Division III games being shown regionally, just to fulfill a contract, was not great, but CBS had to do this 4 times a year. And with the strike, CBS needed programming to fill their Sunday time slot. Obviously, the NFL was pulling in unbelievable television ratings, and by this point in the 1980s, the NFL was the most popular league in the country, having overtaken MLB. And now they had nothing. On September 26th, which is when CBS would have been showing NFC games from Week 3, they decided to air a rerun of Super Bowl XVI. As you can probably expect, the ratings for that were not great, and especially paled in comparison to the regular season games that the network would usually show. CBS knew that they couldn't just show reruns of old NFL games, so they needed to find an alternative, and preferably a live alternative. CBS tried to get some college football games at the Division I level to move from Saturday to Sunday, which seemed like the logical move. This was also the ideal scenario, as the ratings drop-off would be minimal if you had a marquee college football game involving one of the powerhouses like Oklahoma or Penn State. However, the other networks were not too thrilled about this, as ABC and TBS, which also held the rights to college football games, only allowed CBS to do this if they ponied up a ton of money. The demands were so unreasonable, according to CBS, that they opted not to pursue this route. And that's when CBS hatched up an idea. When they went back to the drawing board, they realized that if they couldn't do Division I games, they could try Division III. The plan was incredibly bold. Instead of airing the 4 Division III games with low production quality in regional markets, they were going to air them all on Sunday, October 3rd in the time slot usually occupied by the NFL, and they were going to give them NFL-level production values. You would get graphics packages, you would get highlight packages, you would get tons of camera angles, and most importantly, for the purposes of our story, you would get the top announcers that CBS had to offer. And one of these duos, which would be calling the game between Baldwin-Wallace and Wittenberg, would be the legendary duo of Pat Summerall and John Madden. The crazy part is that there were actually some Division III schools that were opposed to this idea, and balked at moving their game from Saturday to Sunday in a nationally televised time slot. For some schools, moving the game would have interfered with Parents' Day that weekend, and they didn't want to deal with that hassle. For others, they didn't believe in showing games on television, because it would interfere with the educational philosophies that the school had. And even for Wittenberg, amazingly enough, they had their reservations at first, since they are a Lutheran institution, and feared that if the games started too early, that their fans would be unable to attend church, although the two sides worked out a deal. As you can probably expect, the logistics behind this game were crazy, and were unlike the NFL games that the network usually aired. A typical NFL stadium at the time held somewhere in the ballpark of 60,000 people, and had facilities set up for broadcasters and the press. Where Wittenberg played had 6,000 people, and CBS had to use temporary structures, building a platform in the end zone just to be able to fit all of their cameras. CBS even removed windows from the press box to fit everything, and had to use a 35-foot lift because there was no natural end zone location, and they couldn't use a crane because a tree was in the way. And Madden, who could usually arrive to big NFL markets in one straight shot, couldn't even do that to get to Wittenberg. He had to take a train from New York City to Toledo, and then drove from there to Springfield where the game was being played. But here's the thing. Some people would have phoned it in at this opportunity. You go from working the NFL to working Division III football in a matter of 2 weeks. You go from the cream of the crop facilities where you're calling superstars and being watched by millions of people to lower budget facilities where the quality of play isn't that good, and where the television audience is going to be significantly smaller, because no live event, let alone a Division III football game, is going to bring in NFL ratings. Madden could have phoned it in, and no one would have batted an eye. However, in a true testament to the greatness of John Madden, he did the exact opposite.
You know, every week, every Saturday, Division III colleges play each other all over the country. And they always have been playing each other. And it's very exciting, very competitive football. But a lot of people don't always get an opportunity to see it. This week, we do. This week, you get to see these Division III college teams. And we're excited about it.
Amazingly enough, Madden was the first one on board when CBS proposed this idea. As he said on this opportunity, "I'm excited about it. I volunteered for this when I first heard about it. I really did. Last week, we ran replay of the Super Bowl and sat in the studio and talked about the strike. Shoot, that's boring." And it would be one thing if that was just talk. But Madden truly was excited about this. Jeff Nichols, one of the players on Wittenberg, said that practice was intense because Madden was there and was doing his homework on the teams. As Nichols said, "We enjoyed John and Pat coming out to practice. I remember them sitting down against the fence, watching us practice, and talking to the players and getting a feel for who's who and what's what, so they would be prepared for the game on Sunday." And it even went as far as watching film with the teams. Imagine being a Division III football player or coach, and now you're watching film with Super Bowl winning and eventual Hall of Fame coach John Madden. Brian Trim was the student manager for Wittenberg in 1982, and he said that Madden was incredibly active in the film session. As he said, John Madden was running the projector. He sat with the coaches and moved the plays back and forth, asking about certain players. Madden talked about the importance of this broadcast, especially at a time when the NFL was being dominated by money, saying with all the money talks and strike talks, this is refreshing. And with that, on Sunday, October 3rd, 1982, football fans across the country had two options to watch instead of the NFL. They could have flipped on NBC to catch their coverage of the Canadian Football League, or they could have flipped on CBS to watch these two Division III schools with a student body of 2,000 people, no athletic scholarships, no one that's going to go pro or that remotely looks like an NFL quality player, play in a heated rivalry game with Pat Summerall and John Madden on the call. And for the next 3 hours, the majority of the football watching audience was fixated on John Madden calling Division III football.
CBS Sports presents NCAA football. Baldwin-Wallace versus Wittenberg.
Baldwin-Wallace and Wittenberg is like, to these people, Oklahoma and Texas, Alabama and Auburn. It's the most intense rivalry between these two.
When the final whistle sounded, Baldwin-Wallace defeated Wittenberg by a final score of 16-14, silencing the roughly 7,000 fans in attendance, since the stadium was standing room only to the surprise of absolutely no one. And the broadcast was an absolute success. As Kevin O'Malley, the executive producer of college sports for CBS, said on The Experiment, most of the calls we got were from out of town, and most asked if we put on more games like this one next week. People loved having live football on, and having Division III games with NFL-level production was good enough for them to get their football fix until the NFL officially came back. And the ratings were surprisingly good as well. Obviously they weren't NFL level, but they blew NBC out of the water. Whereas NBC got a mere 1.6 million viewers, CBS, with Pat Summerall and John Madden calling a Division III football game, got 4 million viewers. Those numbers were way better than anyone thought they'd be. Having said that, this was a one-time thing. CBS would find other programming to show in the coming weeks to fill their Sunday time slot, and went with boxing, gymnastics, and bodybuilding to fill the rest of their strike programming. Finally, on Sunday, November 21st, CBS would be back showing NFL games again, more than 2 months after their last Sunday NFL broadcast, and Madden would be back calling NFL games, calling cream-of-the-crop football in top facilities. But more than 40 years later, with all the broadcasts that John Madden has ever worked on, this has to be the strangest one of them all, and in an absolutely charming and bizarre way. Imagine being a Division III football player. You're just playing a play. You're not on scholarship, you have no professional aspirations, and there's a chance that you're playing in front of a few fans each week with no coverage outside of one local paper. And now, John Madden and Pat Summerall are calling your game, and CBS has their top production team on campus taking over, and giving you a national audience that you never dreamed in a million years was possible. Back in 1982, that's exactly what happened. It's another incredible moment in the incredible broadcasting career of John Madden. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.